Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Hey, everybody. How are you? Welcome once again to the Behavioral Corner. My name is Steve Martirano. This is my corner. I own this corner. I hang here. And you know why we gather on the corner? Because it's very informal and you never know who's going to come by. Folks come out of, the newsstand over there or the bodega, and they're in a hurry, and very often they stop, and they're always fascinating. And that's certainly the case on the corner today with our guest, R.A. Sexton, Ron by name. I'll tell you, get Ron here in a second, but Ron's a social worker. And I don't know about you guys, but my idea of a social worker comes to me, like everything else, by way of, Law and Order or one of those television shows. And social workers always are the same, depicted the same way on television and in movies. They're frazzled, they're overworked, and they're always carrying around a gigantic stack of folders, which represent their workload and their clients who have every problem under the sun. That's what I think of social work. We're going to find out how much more it is from Ron Sexton today. Ron, thank you for joining us. Ron is a clinical supervisor with our underwriters on this program, Retreat Behavioral Health, and we welcome him to the corner. Hi, Ron. How are you?
Hi, Steve. I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Did I get that sort of popular notion of a social worker right?
So there are social workers walking around with stacks of paper and who are frazzled, but social workers do so much more. For example, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, which means I went through extra training to work in a clinical setting.
And let me see if I understand that. Does that mean that it's just not the job of solving the immediate problem of the client, which is, maybe filling out an application or getting their rent paid, but the underlying clinical reasons for why their lives aren't working?
Yes. How could I put that to simplify it? So social workers, we look beyond what is the immediate problem.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What's right in front of you. That might be more of a counselor who does that. A social worker is looking beyond the beyond. We're always asking questions. We're always connecting. We take a system approach, holistic. We're looking at everything, not just why you're depressed. We're looking at your environment. We're looking at what's going on medically. We're bringing it all together.
Because the immediate problems of most people have more to them than just the surface immediate problem. And that's why later on in the program, when we talk about the impact race has on your work, it becomes more apparent about the size of the problem that social workers work so very hard to try to solve. Tell us about yourself. What brought you to this career?
To be honest with you, Steve, I'm a little new to this career. I came to this career later in life. A little background information. I have a Master of Social Work degree from Temple University. I'm a person who's also in long-term recovery. I got laid off from a job back in, I think, 2008 during that crisis. And I decided to take a college course. And I took a course and I liked it. I took another course. I liked it. And here I am. I planned on going into social science until I discovered I needed to have a PhD and a bunch of other things. And I had an advisor who steered me in the way of social work. And once I got bit by the social work bug, I stuck with it. I like to think of myself as a true social worker. I live and breathe our code of ethics.
Social workers are like the foot soldiers. They're the infantry in the battles we're fighting. Is that right? I mean, you're in the trenches.
That is. We don't shy away from crises where most people would be like, no, a social worker is drawn to it. There's never a social issue too big or small for us. We're like magnets to it.
In that sense, you remind me of firefighters. It's impossible to be cynical about a firefighter. The first time you see a firefighter running into a burning building, you understand something new about dedication.
Yeah.
Because that's, just the instinct to run away from danger. And in your case, the instinct to go, oh, too many problems over there. I can't do that.
It's a passion. I have people, I've had friends ask me, why in the world of all the things that you could have done, why would you choose to do that? And I tell them, I'm glad everybody doesn't think that way. We are needed. Social workers are probably the largest provider of mental health services in the country. I knew that was true 7 or 8 years ago. I don't know that it's true today, but we are probably the largest provider of mental health services.
Never more important right now. And again, it's going to touch upon the issue of race we talked about earlier. Police are too often given the responsibility of handling social services or psychology in situations they're not trained for. A closer cooperation between people like you and the police department would go a long way towards solving a lot of problems we know that we have in that regard. And let me rise to a point of personal privilege here to point out how I know for personal reasons how silly it is to say to somebody in social work, my goodness, why would you have done that? Because I did the same thing when my daughter told me that's what she wanted to do. She's been out for a while now, back in working with children in schools. And I remember when she told me she's going to go into social work, I remember thinking, really? Really? We go, okay, what are you kidding? And it's a stupid idea. Anybody says they're in social work, you should congratulate them. Say, hey, way to go. Way to go. Anyway, let's talk about the nitty gritty of what you do. Clinical social work is fascinating, and it dovetails very directly into my question about, tell us about the relationship between what you do as a social worker and the idea of behavioral health. How does that manifest itself in your work?
Our whole skill set, that is our training. We assess, we diagnose, we work in the areas of prevention. Here in Pennsylvania, for example, I believe a bill just passed, HB. I can't remember I don't want to get it wrong.
Right.
It allows social workers to diagnose and bill insurance. We work independently. We encompass sociology, psychology, psychiatry. We bring them all together into one service.
Is that new bill in Pennsylvania, does that include you guys being able to prescribe?
No, we don't prescribe.
But you can diagnose.
Yes, we do make recommendations depending on the setting that you're working in.
Yeah. In that context, Ron, we're talking to Ron Sexton. He's clinical supervisor at Retreat Behavioral Health. His specialty is social work. In the context of that holistic picture here, what percentage of the people you deal with are suffering from trauma of some sort?
99.9% of the people are suffering from trauma.
We throw that word around a lot these days. People think they understand what trauma means, but it's a little more subtle than that. When you say someone has been traumatized, what are we talking about?
A person who's still impacted by an event that occurred in the past. What we know about, for example, PTSD is it's one of the pathologies that can be traced to a singular event. We can actually tell you what happened when the sexual assault happened, when the car crash happened.
Right. You, though, are in the position of dealing with people every day whose trauma is an ongoing occurrence, correct? Doesn't have to be traced back to any specific event that happened in the past. It's going on all the time, right?
Yep, we certainly do. I do. I encounter people who are in traumatic situations. And what we, as a social worker, what we would try to do is help a person navigate that, offer them healthier choices, educate them, help them to see. I never want to tell a person what to do. I want to teach a person to make healthy choices.
The people you're dealing with are traumatized, like you said, quite beyond a specific event that may have happened in the past. They're traumatized, literally traumatized by things like poverty, crime, and violence.
Yep.
And it doesn't even have to be violence that's occurred to them personally. It's just violence in their environment.
So I'll give you a perfect example. I know we have a limited amount of time. There is a study, and I believe it's out of the University of Maryland or Baltimore. It's called The Long Shadow. Entwistle is one of the authors of it. It's a longitudinal study, and it goes on to explain the trauma experienced by children growing up in inner city Baltimore. It's really amazing. It had to be very expensive to do it. It goes across 20 years. But even as simple as being poor, waking up, worrying about what you're going to eat, opening your front door, walking out of your front door, getting from your door to school every day, you're bathing your brain in these stress hormones. It's stressful. And imagine living in that for your life. Imagine being 18 years old and that is all you know, to where it's your normal. And then what we see is, these individuals will act out in violent ways or substance use, self-medicating. And oftentimes society will fall back and they'll say, wow, look what happened to them. They're on drugs. There are those of us who would say, how could they not be on drugs and experiencing this day in and day out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it should be obvious, and it often is not, that any situation that involves 10, 11, 12-year-old child who has seen one person dead, one person dead through violence would be traumatized by that. And as you know, these kids have seen many more than one person dead. In fact, violence can be so pervasive that the trauma goes unnoticed. You know what I mean? I mean, they're being traumatized and not even aware of the trauma. Is that right?
Community trauma, new areas, that's a new area of research. Whole communities are traumatized. The one that sticks out is the individual who is not traumatized.
Yeah. You must look for them night and day just to find out what shielded them from that, that they hadn't become sociopaths about it. It just doesn't affect them the way it does everyone else. It's an impossible difficulty. I think a better understanding of some of what social workers do in this context would go a long way towards opening people's eyes about the problem of being poor and in a minority. It's almost impossible for white people to understand what that's like.
There's racial trauma. There's generational trauma that's been passed on. There's studies that have been done that show that can trace it back to slavery. Trauma that is passed on for generations from grandparent to child, and it just goes down. It goes down, and it's even been shown where it can alter the DNA, the genetics of an individual.
Well, certainly it wouldn't surprise me if it changes your brain chemistry. It makes you rewire for survival.
Yes.
And so obviously you're going to pick up some bad habits if it's about survival. But I think there's so much work to be done in that area. I understand that the whole woke thing has now been used to bludgeon people over the head the minute they act like they're interested in the other people. What's going on over there? Maybe we should take a look at that. Oh, you're so woke. It's really an annoying phenomenon, but it's something that must be pressed forward. Ron Sexton was kind enough to tell me about what's going on professionally in his career. He is, of course, a member of the National Society of Social Workers, a gigantic organization, over, I guess, 100,000 members of it. As we said, these are the people in the trenches. The New York chapter has been having a series of webinars on the issue of race, everything we've talked about, but more specifically, or certainly, how it affects them in their work. And Ron said, if you're interested, there's a town hall, drop in, it's open, and you can listen. And I did, and it was fascinating. And I know it's important to you to talk about that effort. So tell us about race and social work.
I can tell you the town hall was amazing. Close to 1,000 people between Facebook and the Zoom meeting, engaging together. And the title of it was Racism and White Supremacy in Social Work. So just so the title doesn't get away from us, when you hear the term white supremacy, we're not talking about people walking around with hoods on and flags and waving them. No, we're talking about a system that upholds white supremacy and oppresses other cultures and races. Rarely, we only see the most loud and vocal, but there's a lot that goes on underneath. We engaged as social workers about racism in our own profession, and I was amazed. There's a lot of smart people out there.
Yes, and thinking about it. Again, this notion of white supremacy or privilege is can get even fair-minded liberals set back a little bit. Wait a minute, what do you mean? And I think they're not. I struggle to understand what that really means, and I think I'm getting a little better at it. For instance, the phenomenon of almost always being the only person of color in any situation at some point must weigh upon a person. To be the only, overwhelmingly everybody around you is white. That's a different deal.
It is. And as a social worker, as an African American male social worker, I'm even rarer. When I was in graduate school, I know there were more like me and people that looked like me, but there was only one other African American male in my class. And you would think, when we look at the populations that we serve, that there would be more of a representation. And that begs the question, like, why is that so? Why isn't there more representation of African Americans and African American males in social work? I know that historically, social work activities were carried out by affluent white women. Only until recently has it crossed over. Have others begun doing those services?
Yeah, tell me why. I think I know why, but you begin with the altruistic white women gravitating towards this field, and then it occurs to me that Black women would also be more inclined to wind up in a social work environment when the problem in those communities very often is a lack of men.
Yes.
What are you guys doing as an organization to bring more young men into social work?
Well, I know that some of the chapters, for example, now there's a National Association of Black Social Workers. One of the issues is pay and access to education. So, for example, if you're African American male and you're fortunate enough to make it to that point where you're ready to go to grad school, ask yourself, do I want to spend probably close to six figures on this, or do I want to do that? Also, once you're in the field, where is the representation? For those that are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, oftentimes we're in the agency, but we're not in positions of power.
Right.
To recruit and open the door for others.
Yeah. There's a lot of areas where that's the case. Some of the notes that you sent me to take a look at, I really need some elaboration on. You talk about, or you mentioned, privilege of emotion. What's that mean?
Privilege of emotion. So this is one that is a new phrase I learned in the town hall. I know what the meaning is, but I've never heard that said. Privilege of emotion is when you have social worker of color, Indigenous or color, BIPOC, in an agency, and how we are expected to behave. We cannot be our true self. Expressions of emotion are interpreted differently. To bring it back to the angry Black woman, or if I'm passionate, I'm angry. It's often it can be perceived as anger. In fact, it has been perceived as anger. I can be passionate, and that happens. And I can't say this is specific to social work, but Blackness is policed, which makes it hard.
Well, yeah, I know police is. I hear you. It's also completely misunderstood. The idea that a woman of color, Black woman, might be angry shouldn't strike anybody as unusual, but it does, or inappropriate. I heard something in that town hall meeting that set me back. I should have been aware of it, and I wasn't. One of the participants said that she could tell, and most Blacks understand this, that they have to be not just competent at their jobs, but better than competent, because it's unforgivable to be thought of as a weak or lousy employee if you're a person of color. And I just was struck by that, because we've all worked for people who were not particularly good at what they did. They were just assigned to, well, they're just not very good at it. There's something else that goes on when it's a person of color who is perceived as not being, up to snuff.
And that's where, privilege.
That's where that privilege is, right?
Yeah. And it goes back to privilege of emotion, being able to be yourself.
And you're being misunderstood. There's nothing worse than being misunderstood. When you're trying to make a point, no matter what it is, if the other person's not hearing your point, it's very frustrating. Can lead to anger. Certainly leads to a lack of productivity or something. Just one other item that I wanted you to expand upon, and that has to do with cultural competency versus cultural proficiency. What are we talking about there?
But cultural competency is just one step in a continuum of cultural proficiency. The continuum starts with cultural destructiveness, moves on to cultural incapacity, then on to cultural blindness, then there's cultural precompetence, then there's cultural competence. And I'm going to read from this. It's a manual for school leaders just on the cultural competence part. Cultural competence is defined as interacting with other cultural groups using the 5 essential elements of cultural proficiency as the standard for individual behavior and practices. In this stage, what we would do is we would see the difference, understand the difference that differences make. Does that make sense to you, Steve?
Yes, it does. It's great. The differences that the differences make. Yeah, of course it makes sense.
So the final one is cultural proficiency, knowing how to learn about individual and organizational culture, interacting effectively in a variety of cultural environments, proficient use of the 5 elements of cultural proficiency, and the ability to successfully adapt and provide services in response to cultural diversity at individual and institutional levels. We would see the difference and respond effectively and affirmingly. But for some reason, when I heard this term, I went and looked it up and did quite a bit of reading on it. We stop at cultural competency when it's not optimal.
For what? Optimal for what?
For institutional change. Cultural competency this is what I'm getting is individual. It is on the individual to be culturally competent, to be culturally proficient, at least in the agency or the school or wherever we're operating. It needs to become part of the institution.
Yes, so that we arrive at a point, if I understand you correctly, where our diversity is understood, integrated, so that you can provide better help, more solutions to the problem. And instead, we find ourselves still struggling as a culture with this idea that different people are to be feared and pushed away rather than embraced, understood, and then if they have problems, helped.
And Steve, make no mistake, the individuals we serve benefit by this.
I knew from listening to the town hall that this was not just a bitch session of people telling us how hard their work was. They were saying, yeah, my job's made harder by all this stuff. But boy, if we could just eliminate all this stuff, it would make not only my job easier, but maybe the problems easier. Right?
Yep, for sure.
That's what I took out of it. It was fascinating. And I know that effort goes on and on. They have, if people want more information about this, and it's important, you should. If they were to go to the association's website, it's a great website, it's real clear, National Society of Social Workers, chapter and verse on the stuff that we're talking about with Ron Sexton. So, Ron, looking forward, are you hopeful about this effort?
If I may, here at Retreat, we're always looking for ways to improve and provide more education and training to our staff and make it a more diverse and inclusive agency facility.
Yeah, at Retreat, they handle, in addition to substance abuse clients and patients, they also have a growing mental health facility now. And clearly, in both those situations, you can, I guess, do an okay job if all you did was treated people in those two categories, treated their symptoms, and didn't get to what's really going on underneath. And that's what I understand, what we've been talking about, and what your social work encompasses. Ron, this is a big topic. We can do this like 4 times a year.
We can do this for hours, actually.
We can do it for weeks and weeks.
A warm-up for days.
Well, you know where we are on the corner now, the behavioral corner. We're so grateful for your time and for shedding some light on this important topic for us. Thanks so much. Just real quickly, I know the answer, I guess. All of this is made exponentially more difficult set against the backdrop of a virus, which, in addition to affecting us all, has had an inordinate impact on the communities you're talking about.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I just read a local newspaper from down in York County where where overdoses are up by like 30 or 40 over last year. Yeah. Suicide is up. I would encourage anyone to reach out. Socially, we should really change the way we think about it. Socially distancing is really just physically distancing.
Exactly.
We can stay socially connected, sort of like what you and I are doing here, Steve.
Real important. Lots of folks have come on and said exactly that. We mean distance. We don't mean physical distance. We don't mean separation. Last word, Ron, you can be, I guess, certainly can be of some help here. The vaccine is coming. People are going to get it. In the African-American community, there is some difficulty for a lot of reasons. What do you say to African-Americans who are a little worried about that vaccine?
I would say I got the vaccine.
Okay.
I got the vaccine. I would say that the benefits far outweigh the potential costs. African-American men, my doctor just told me I was in for a physical that for some reason unknown to them yet are very impacted by the illness. Like it seems to be affecting us worse than it is other groups.
Yeah.
That's what the research is showing. Please check in with your primary care physician, talk it over with them, and consider getting the vaccine.
R.A. Sexton, Ron Sexton, Clinical Supervisor, Retreat Behavioral Health. Come back again?
Yep. Thank you, Steve.
Appreciate it.
Every storm runs out of rain, according to the great Maya Angelou. Her words can remind us of one very simple truth, that storms do cross our paths, but they don't last forever. So the question remains, how do we ride out this storm of COVID-19 and all the other storms life may throw our way? Where do we turn when issues such as mental health or substance abuse begin to deeply affect our lives? Look to Retreat Behavioral Health. With a team of industry-leading experts, they work tirelessly to provide compassionate, holistic, and affordable treatment. Call to learn more today. 855-802-6600. Retreat Behavioral Health, where healing happens.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.